Hello and welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, your daily stop for decoding current affairs with clarity, depth, and exam relevance. It's July 22nd, 2025, and today's edition dives into two important articles from Mains 2025. Firstly, we examine the Supreme Court's remarks on the Enforcement Directorate, understanding concerns around political misuse and institutional integrity. Then we try to explore the legal status of the right to vote in the country. Is it a fundamental right or a statutory one, and why the distinction matters for our democracy? In our Prelims 2026 simplified section, we bring updates on the income tax bill, the role of the Vice President of India, deep sea mining rules, NASA and ISRO's collaboration, and the latest data on the industrial activity in the country. So let's begin. Hello guys, welcome back again. I hope you all are doing fine, and I hope your preparation is also going fine. So with this, let us start with today's very first article, which is on Enforcement Directorate, because recently the Supreme Court rebuked the institution for its political considerations, and that is why we have to look at it from the lens of the statutory regulatory body in the country with reference to the GS2 topics. Now, with reference to prelims, we also need to understand the various facts and the information regarding Enforcement Directorate. So let us start with the very basics regarding firstly the formation of the Enforcement Directorate, because the ED as we know it right now did not exist in 1956. It was actually known as the Enforcement Unit, which was under the Department of Economic Affairs under the Ministry of Finance. And mainly back then it was entrusted with the FERA Act of 1947, where the headquarters were decided to be kept at Delhi, while we also had the Bombay and the Calcutta branches, where we only had two branches earlier. The director of the ED back then was actually the legal service officer. And fast forward to 1957, it was renamed as Enforcement Directorate for the first time, with an additional branch being opened in Chennai. And in 1960, the administrative control of the ED was finally transferred to the Department of Revenue under the Ministry of Finance. So this is the current department that we have to remember for our examination. Also, in the 1970s to around 80s and 90s, throughout the entire world, the global community experienced a very serious issue, that is a drug menace. In various Hollywood movies, you can also see that the 1960s, 70s decades was actually filled with various instances of criminalities related to money laundering and drug trafficking in the entire world. And mainly it was the United States who tried to clamp down heavily on the drug trafficking cartels. And that is when the United States began international anti-money laundering regime, because the US government realized back then that drug trafficking and the money that you need for the drug trafficking and the various other activities, financial activities, had a direct bearing with the money laundering activities which is taking place. Further, the money laundering activities which were taking place back in 70s, 80s, 90s, and also from 2000 onwards came to be also linked with terrorism activities. So that is why, in the 70s and 80s decade, there was an international, awareness that we need a particular legislation or an institution to fight this menace. And that is why India in 2000, repealed the FERA Act and it replaced with the Foreign Exchange Management Act of 1999. One of the reasons was actually the liberalization of the country. That Indian economy went through liberalization, privatization and globalization in 1990s. And that is to actually open up our economy to the foreign markets so that we can actually attract many investments. We can actually try to, sell our not working public sector enterprises. Also, we need to be integrated with the global economy. And that is actually one of the main reasons why this act was introduced. The second reason was actually to have an international regime or a set of rules and standards to combat money laundering. And that is when finally in 2005, the ED or the Enforcement Directorate was finally empowered with the PMLA Act, that is the Prevention of Money Laundering Act in the country. And that is where we have to understand, since then ED is actually very much active to combat the drug trafficking, to combat terror financing, and also ED has been tasked with various other acts such as the FEMA, 1999, such as the Fugitive Economic Offenders Act of 2018, and also the COFEPOSA Act, which we'll be discussing in detail in the next slides. And when we also have to understand that over a period of time, the structure of ED, that is a hierarchy of the administration within the organization, is also very important for us to know. While we know that the headquarters are at Delhi, there is actually the top post of the Director of Enforcement. Along with it, we also have various regional offices. We know that Bombay, Calcutta and Chennai were the very first offices. Apart from them, we also have Chandigarh. While we have 10 other zonal offices which are headed by the deputy directors of the AD. Within that, we also have the sub-zonal directors which are headed by assistant directors. This is just the organization that you need to know for the examination. Also, the various officers who work actually come from the IRS, the IPS, the IAS, and also sometimes come on deputation or sometimes with reference to direct recruitment when we talk about the various experts related to finance, technology and various other fields who actually work also as a part of the enforcement directorate. Because you know that to actually fight money laundering, to actually fight the drug cartel, we need experts in the field apart from officers. We need various domain experts. That is why they are also sometimes directly recruited. Now, when we talk about the tenure of the ED chief, it has a tenure of around 2 years, and it was also amended in 2021 that it can be extended, the tenure of the same can be extended to 3 more additional years, that is 1 + 1 + 1 years, and taking the total term to around 5 years if the central government permits the same. And if at all the central government wants to extend the present director's term to 5 years, it has to recommend the same to the high level committees. Now the high level committees will again be recommending the extension. And in 2023, the Supreme Court finally told that these 2021 amendments were valid, no issues with them, but arbitrary extensions of the directors should be struck down, right? So that means that any extension, if it is not fulfilling the service norms, will be struck down. Also, with reference to recent times now, we have seen how, when we have looked at the origin of the ED, initially it was actually focused on drug trafficking and money laundering related activities which were highly correlated with each other. But over a period of time, we have seen how gradually the offenses increased from 6 to 30 plus. That means increasingly we also have included wildlife trafficking, we also have included terrorism. So the PMLA Act, or say the ED powers within the same, has increased manifold. And that is where we now have to talk about how ED actually works. With reference to the various acts we have seen, the main primary act here is the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, where mainly the powers here include under various sections. For example, section 16 include the power of survey, 17 search and seizure, 19 arrest of accused, right? So the ED can actually arrest people. And finally, Section 50, which is perhaps the most contentious one, which actually empowers the ED to summon people with reference to any charges that actually have come across, or even they can record their statement and submitted evidence, right, which they have been doing in recent times, and that is what is actually causing various troubles, right? We have to understand that other statutory functions of the ED with reference to the FEMA actually empowers the ED to have various civil enforcement, investigation, adjudication and also penalties, right? So the ED have actually broad powers under the same. Also under the Fugitive Economic Offenders Act, they can actually seize the properties and also initiate confiscation of the properties of the people who have run away, run abroad, right, with reference to various economic offenses they've committed within the country. Also, within the final act, it is actually empowering the ED to also have proposals regarding preventive detention. So if you see, these are actually very wide powers. And also combine the expanding powers of ED in recent times, we can actually understand how ED can over a period of time become so important. Further, it is also important to note something, that ED cannot take any action on its own, right? For example, if ED wants to actually investigate some person, it cannot do so because there has to be an FIR or any other request by any other authority to be presented to the ED, and that is when only the ED will be taking over the case, right? So a simple FIR can actually involve the ED. Also, it can conduct search and arrest directly. It is empowered with this kind of authority. And also, ED has around 60 days to file prosecution after arrest, which is much more higher than the police authorities. This is actually one of the main contentions which also are charged against the ED for being it too much encroaching upon the fundamental rights of the citizens. Also, if you just search ED and news in the Google, over the last 24 hours, you will be seeing so many cases where ED has released summons to some actors. Also, ED has issued some summons to even Google and Meta regarding some dating app cases. And at the end of the day, we have also seen so many private companies who are receiving summons from the ED. So, always in the recent times, we see that this organization is related to so many cases. And this is where we have to now understand why that is the problem. Why in recent times the ED has been facing so much of heat and criticism. Firstly, according to various experts, there have been allegations that ED has been immersing itself in ordinary crimes which normally the police should be investigating or say arresting. So here, mainly the encroachment of the ED in police operations is one of the most important cases. Second, there have been various allegations of targeting opposition and activists. If you can see from this report from the Indian Express, and also the data has been gathered from various court documents and so on, it has been seen that during the UPA regime, which was the previous regimes, right, and when we compare the same with the NDA-2 government, you can starkly see the comparisons here, where ED has been involved in so many cases of ex-chief ministers, right, serving MPs, even ex-MLAs, where these cases are increasing over a period of time. And also, if you can understand why I'm talking about some of the MPs or ex-MLAs or ex-chief ministers, because they generally belong from the opposition government. And this is where there have been higher amount of charges being pressed against them according to various people and according to various experts here. Now, there also has been another allegation that while it is conducting various investigations, mainly while it is actually submitting the ECIR, this is actually very similar to the FIR that we actually see in the police stations. There has been a lack of transparency when the copy of the ECIR is not given to the accused. And if you do not give the copy of the same, how the accused can actually understand what the charges are, right? And also, when we talk about the case selection, sometimes it has been very opaque as to how these cases are selected by the ED. It has been very difficult for us to understand. Next, in recent times, we have seen how these bail conditions are extremely difficult for people to get if they are charged with reference to some of the offenses by the ED. Because according to the norms, it is said that it has to be on the satisfaction of the judge. If at all the judge is giving a bail to an accused under the ED, that means that the judge has to be 100% sure that that person is not involved in money laundering or drug trafficking or terrorism activities. Now it becomes very difficult for the judge, to ascertain whether the person is accused or not. Right? And that is why it has been seen in recent times that judges generally choose a safe route by accepting the charges present against them. And that is what the Supreme Court also observed in February 2025 this year, when Supreme Court actually tried to relax some norms with reference to bail, because according to the Supreme Court, it told that bail must be the norm, right, not a privilege. Right? And also, at the end of the day, when we look at the conviction rates, right, based on the data that we have gotten from 2005 to recent times, we have seen that only 23 people have been convicted. And with reference to, complaints, there are so many complaints, but only 23 people have been convicted so far. Also, if you can look at the recent data, from 2015 to 2025, over the last 10 years, there have been only 2 convictions. That means that the ED registers some cases and let the case pending over a period of time, right? And at the end of the day, many people are also acquitted of some charges. So that means that there are sometimes not a concrete case presented by the ED in front of the courts. And at the end of the day, courts sometimes do not find the accused in real spirit. So that is why in recent times also, yesterday also, the Supreme Court had some very sharp remarks on the ED's operation, right? In two separate cases involving the Supreme Court and the Madras High Court, the ED was rebuked heavily. The Madras High Court told that ED is not a super cop to investigate everything under the sun. Also, the Supreme Court, via the Chief Justice of India, remarked that why are you being used for political battles? So the Chief Justice of India asked the ED that you should not be spreading the virus of, registering the cases against political opponents across India. Because, if you want to fight political battles, you have to fight it in cases of some elections. Right? There has been so many cases where, this ex-chief ministers, these ex-MLAs have been convicted on some offences, and that battle is run out in the courtrooms. So the Supreme Court told ED that do not use the Supreme Court or the High Court as your political platform, as your political battleground. So it was actually an indirect messages to the political leaders, in fact, that you should actually understand how political fights should happen. They should happen via voting, via elections, right? And not via in these ways. And that is why Supreme Court also observed in many cases that there are no evidence of money laundering at all. In some cases, there are no cases related to money laundering because the ED actually failed to understand or say, clarify the proceeds of the crime. I mean, the money that is involved in terror financing or money laundering. Sometimes the ED actually failed to prove the same. So this is what Supreme Court's observations are. And three big concerns which Supreme Court highlighted, that 82% of the ED cases are against opposition leaders over the last 10 years or so according to ADR report. Also, only 5% convictions have been seen during this time. And at the end of the day, it has been seen how some chief ministers, and some MLAs have been threatened with, ED arrests and summons. That means, are we trying to weaponize the ED and try to instill fear in our political opponents? So that is why we need some reforms at the end of the day. We need to adopt a way forward that firstly we need to ensure due process of law, and we have to share the charges, the details of the summons to the accused in form of ECIR, which is right now not shared. Also, we must be trying to reduce political interference, and this can be done by strengthening the appointments and the removal of the ED. We can actually give more powers by making it an independent authority. Next, we have to make the bail process much more easier and human for the people to approach. Next, we need parliamentary and judicial oversight on high-profile cases involving mainly the political characters. And at the end of the day, we need to improve the conviction rates. They are extremely poor. If I am charging someone, at the end of the day, I am realizing the charges are not genuine, they are false. That means my credibility and my authority is of not much value. That is why through strong evidence we must be doing the same. Also recently Supreme Court has observed how ED is going between the client and lawyer relationship, which is actually one of the main pillars of legal jurisprudence. So this is something which we also need to look at. So there is this practice question for all of you at the end of this topic. Practice this, let me know the comments, and I'll be looking for the same. So let me move on to the next one. Guys, in the next one, we have a very important and interesting article in the Hindu related to the right to vote in the country. Now this article is talking in details about the various legalities that we have to know regarding the right to vote in India. And this is actually related to GS2, Salient Features of Representation of People's Act. Let us start with the very basics of what is a right. Right is any obligation that you have with reference to your state or your country's legal apparatus. That means if you are an individual, if you want to do something, you must be allowed to do. That is your right. Now, there are so many different types of rights. Firstly, we have to start with natural rights. Now, the source of natural rights are not written anywhere in the country. It is not in any law. It is actually based on the morality and our own human dignity, because by the virtue of us being humans, we need some rights. For example, right to food, right to shelter, right to have a life full of dignity. So that is where these natural rights come in, which are actually age-old conceptions when we talk about the moral philosophers such as Locke, Rousseau, and also Paine, and at the end of the day, the US Declaration of Rights, right, which also talked about the most important rights. There are the rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So these are all the important aspects of natural rights. Now in the country, they are not directly enforceable unless it is actually a part of your fundamental rights. Now this actually brings us to our fundamental rights, because here some of the natural rights such as right to life under Article 21 are included. You know that fundamental rights are actually under the part 3 of our constitution, and these are guaranteed by the constitution via these articles. Why these are guaranteed? Because you can actually go to the Supreme Court directly if you actually find any breach of your rights. These are fundamental to your well-being, fundamental to expanding your liberties, freedom and opportunities. And there are other kinds of rights also. We have the constitutional ones, which are actually outside the part 3 but within the constitution. For example, right to property, right to free trade, which are actually not mentioned in the part 3, and these are actually generally enforceable via the high courts under the Article 226. And mainly we have some parliamentary laws, right, or some state legislative laws which are enforcing this. And at the end of the day, we have normal rights which are known as the legal or statutory rights, which are created by laws passed by our parliament, passed by our state legislative assemblies, and here these are not actually a part of the constitution. Maybe they can have some indirect bearing from the constitution, and here they are actually enforceable according to the law. Sometimes enforceability can be with reference to the high court or say the lower courts, or there can be cases of mediations also. So these include the right to work, right to food and right to vote. So here at the end of the day, we find that right to vote is actually our legal right, not a fundamental, not a constitutional, nor a natural right in the country officially. Now here I have to look at it from a constitutional angle. Article 326 is a very important one, which is giving us universal adult suffrage. Why? Because if you read the text along with me, you will get to understand so many things, and that is why I recommend all of you to actually read your bare acts, because there are so many things which are hidden within the clauses and the phrases of our articles. Now it says that the elections to the House of the People, that is the Lok Sabha, and to the State Legislative Assembly of every state shall be on the base of adult suffrage. That is to say, every person who is a citizen of India, very important that only a citizen of India is allowed, and who is not less than 18 years of age on such day as may be fixed on behalf of any law. That means the Article 326 is telling that with reference to these provisions, there must be a law, and this law is actually passed by the Parliament of our country, right? And this is where this appropriate legislature come into, which is our Parliament, and is not otherwise disqualified under this constitution. That is, means that you must be having 18 years of age, otherwise you also must not be disqualified under any provisions of the constitution, for which also there must be a law. There must be a law again, which has to be made by the Parliament, right? On the ground of non-residence, unsoundness of mind, crime or corrupt or illegal practice shall be entitled to be registered as a voter at such elections. So this is where you have some exceptions, such as non-citizens cannot vote, persons who are disqualified under law, examples unsound mind, corrupt practices, right, which has been mentioned in the constitution. Now, since the Article 326 specifically told us that we must be having a law, the Government of India actually has one law. That is the Representation of the People's Act 1950, where the section 16 actually bars any non-citizen from electoral rolls. Also, section 19 requires voters to be more than 18 years of age at a particular qualifying date. You can let me know what is the date here. And also that person must be an ordinary resident of the constituency. For example, if you are a student from Jharkhand and you are actually legally allowed to vote in Jharkhand, right, in your own constituency, but you are living in Delhi for 2 years. But what happens when there is an election in Delhi or in Jharkhand? You have to go physically at your constituency and you have to vote. That is where you have to be understanding the meaning of ordinary resident. Next, you have the Representation of People Act of 1951, wherein the section 62 tells you that you have the right to vote if you are a registered elector. Now there are some exceptions here. That is, if you are disqualified under the 1950 Act, you cannot vote. And also, unless you are in preventive detention, in prison, you also do not have a right to vote. Now, according to the election conduct rules of 1961, we have another provision within the same, that with reference to various service voters, right? So there is actually rule number 18 within this particular rules, where these people have entitlement to their postal ballots. That means they can actually, with reference to some armed forces, they can send it their votes via postal ballots here. So this is where the conditions of the right to vote are in the country. Now, with reference to this aspect, there has been so many cases at the Supreme Court whether we have to classify this right to vote as a constitutional right or as a legal right. So that is actually the battle that the courts, mainly the Supreme Court here, has actually delivered various orders on. Now, firstly, we have the 1952 case where the Supreme Court told that we have the right to vote in the country as a statutory right. It is not a fundamental right, it is only a statutory right. Then came the Jyoti Basu case of 1982. That means that voting is neither a fundamental nor a common right, only a statutory right. The next case is very interesting. That is the PUCL case of 2003. Now the PUCL case here, Justice P.V. Reddy observed a very important and interesting thing. He told that, the Article 326 specifically mentions a law that must be made for such provisions of right to vote in the country. According to that, the Parliament of India actually passed the People Act 1950 and Representation of People Act 1951. And based on this, the earlier judgment actually told that, okay, because we have the right to vote under these articles, that is why, these are, the statutory rights. Because the right to vote in the country is backed by legal means, not by this constitutional article. This constitutional article has just mentioned that there must be a law, and that is why there are two laws. That is why this particular judgment thought of deliberating upon this. After this, in 2006, the Kuldeep Nair case switched back its recommendation to the right to vote being a statutory right. The constitutional bench ruled that voting remains a statutory right because we get the powers under the Representation of People Act here. That is to be noted. Now, the next case, Raj Bala versus State of Haryana, 2015, again reaffirmed that it is a constitutional right now. Right? So the division bench viewed that it is we have to follow the PUCL argument, right, and we have to make it a constitutional right. Again, we see in Anup Baranwal case of 2023, and as of now it is a final word. The majority view, the majority judgment in that particular case reaffirmed that it is a statutory right in the country. And here we have Justice Rastogi who dissented and told that right to vote is intrinsic to democracy. That means as a part of our basic structure, which actually constitutes of federalism, of fundamental rights. So if I'm trying to empower the people, what more important can be our citizens' right to vote, right to choose the government, right to choose their representatives that would frame law for them tomorrow. So this bench tried to argue in this way that if we talk about the basic structure, we cannot ignore elections. We need free and fair elections, which must be giving the benefits to all citizens to vote. Next, also, the judge linked the same with Article 19, which is giving us the freedom of expression. Also, right to vote and the right to choose your representatives forms a part of your freedom of expression too, because through your vote you are expressing your choice. And at the end of the day, it kind of suggested that it must be a constitutional right. But as of now, the majority judgment adopted that it must be a statutory right as of now. Next, if you can see, in 2023, the Manipur court also held the right to vote as an extension of Article 19, that is the freedom of expression. That means the voters have their right to know in various cases. Also, recently, if you can see, the electoral roll revision in Bihar is actually bringing up the issue as to who the voters should be. And at the end of the day, we have also some news coming from the UK where they are thinking of bringing down the universal age of voting to 16 years. So these are the variety of debates which are going on in the country and outside the country regarding right to vote. And based on this, you have to attempt these questions. You Do let me know what is the answer in the comments. Now on to the simplified articles. Guys, recently the Parliamentary Select Committee submitted its report on the income tax bill. We are going to look into the provisions and we are going to understand what are the main issues here from the perspective of government budgeting in GS3 paper, because in your mains earlier in 2018 there have been questions related to taxation proposals mainly in the union budget, and here if we are talking about a new bill, it also automatically becomes very important for your upcoming mains examination. So let us firstly understand what are the features of the new income tax bill. Firstly, we have to understand that the government of India is very stringent upon the people who do not pay taxes. That means that there are huge instances where we see black money being used in the economy, and this is where the government has to take some actions. Now, over a period of time, the nature of black money has also changed. We have come from a physical world to a digital world right now. The same has also happened with the criminal activities, and that is why this bill is carrying some important provisions to increase surveillance on the digital spheres of various taxpayers. Now, firstly, when we talk about the simple provisions, this bill is trying to change the tax year concept, because right now, if this bill becomes an act, then from April onwards, you will be actually having the tax year. That means that tax will be calculated within the same tax year, and this will be for a period of 12 months. Now also, the language, that means the law, the income tax law that we had earlier was extremely complex. If you can see, there were so many words, there were so many chapters which have been reduced in this particular bill. Right? It has been made much more simpler, much more easier for people to understand. So we are trying to simplify the laws and making the lives easier for the taxpayers. Also, with reference to income, it has been expanded to also include your income that you are earning from the virtual digital assets such as cryptocurrencies or various other digital assets such as NFTs, where those incomes will also now be calculated. Now, with reference to the various provisions, now we have various easy to read tables within this particular bill with reference to various TDS, tax deduction as source, presumptive taxation rates, and various assessment time limits, which are actually some of the important norms that need simplification, because these are not your normal taxation provisions. These are generally the taxation provisions where various business people or various service providers or various professionals use to file their taxes. So it becomes lives much more easier for them. Also, here now we are getting to the main part where a virtual digital space has been included in the law. This includes anything stored or that can be accessed online, including your bank details, social media accounts, emails, cloud messages, cloud files, and everything. That means that if the income tax officers suspect that you are involved in black money activities, you are evading taxes, you are not paying taxes on time, that means it can search your email, it can search your social media account, or it can also, with reference to your net banking, your UPI transactions, it can actually look into the same. It can look into your electronic record, files, messages, transaction histories, and everything. That means that it is actually one of the instances where your privacy is breached according to some experts, which we are going into the next slide. Also, at the end of the day, we are removing some of the redundant provisions which are not anymore in the country. For example, we earlier had the fringe benefit tax, which is a tax to impose on the various employers who are giving various benefits to their employees, not in the form of money, but maybe in the form of car allowances, luxurious hotels, and so on. So those used to be taxed at 30% earlier, but this is the tax which is no longer present in the country. But still there are provisions within the Income Tax Act for that. So we have to remove that also. So those redundant provisions are removed as of now. But yeah, I have to come to the main issue of this particular virtual digital space. According to various experts, they are telling that this is giving unchecked powers to the tax authorities. That means My emails, my social media accounts, my digital applications, everything will be exposed to the income tax department. That they can inspect any information in electronic media or in the computer system which relates to your tax evasion. Sometimes the income tax officials, according to some experts, can file some false cases and get access to your emails, specifically if you are a political opponent, if you are someone who is against the government of the day. So this is what the concerns are, that is against your privacy. So they are telling that the solution is very simple. If you access my emails, my messages, maybe that is not perfect, but maybe for the sake of investigation that needs to be done. Okay, for the end of the day, that is fine, but there must be an official record. It must be written and given to the person whose records are being assessed. So that is why a written record, a digital record, or a record by the department must be given to the accused person. Now here, the government is giving various justifications, mainly the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. It is giving that we are living in a digital world, so that is why the income tax authorities also need digital powers. They are also telling that the income tax department is under the Digital Data Protection Act. That means it will be abiding by the rules and regulations when we talk about preserving our data with reference to privacy norms. Also, the Ministry of Law and Justice, it is telling that the right to privacy under Article 21 is not absolute in the country. According to Article 19 and Article 21 and various Supreme Court judgments, right, with reference to national security, public order, morality, contempt of court, defamation, incitement to violence or offense, and also crime prevention, these are justified limitations on your privacy. That means if the government deems it fine, it can actually do so and go forward with this transgression on your privacy violation. Apart from that, we have other key recommendations. For example, say the earlier draft bill had some provisions of taxing 30% on anonymous donations with reference to some NGOs or some charity organizations. Now this has been removed here because on the committee's recommendation it has been found that this religion or say charity-based organizations have some donation boxes that you have seen in various temples and churches and mosques, right? So it is very difficult to understand who donated to that particular boxes because these are totally anonymous. Donor identification is practically impossible, right? And also there are so many institutions or NGOs who will be shut down if this provision were actually to be brought in real life. So that is where this was brought back. Also, the TDS refunds with reference to mandatory return filing has been relaxed for some people such as housewives or students who do not normally file their taxes every time or frequently. They sometimes maybe have received some small payments from some freelance works, right? Or they are actually very much more lower than the normal income tax obligations. So for them, this TDS filing has been, or with reference to the returns, that has been actually been made much more easier. So this clause 263 has been removed with reference to this earlier kind of provision which made it mandatory for them to file this kind of returns. So this mandatory return filing is kind of not abiding to those non-taxable individuals, correct? Now this is trying to relax the norms for these and trying to make the lives of people much more easier. Now we have completed this topic. We'll be moving on to the next one. Jagdeep Dhankar, who was our vice president, resigned in a dramatic turn of events last night. And in this newspaper today, from the Indian Express, we have a detailed aspect of how are the various provisions that are related to the vice president of our country. So this will be an extremely factual discussion, right, where we will be trying to revise all the important provisions related to vice president from a constitutional perspective. So here mainly you have to revise your content, and if you are new to this concept, you just follow along. Now in India we have the president and we have the vice president. But in India we follow a parliamentary system where we generally have the council of ministers headed by the prime minister who takes most of the decisions. Now with reference to the vice president here, It is actually the second highest constitutional office just after the president of our country. And it is modeled on the US vice president. So with reference to any question in the prelims or in the mains, you have to write along these lines. With reference to the articles, we have Article 63, which is actually the main article for the same. Article 64 tells that the vice president shall be the ex officio chairperson of the Rajya Sabha. That is very important. It serves the same role as the Speaker of the Lok Sabha. Then Article 65 is also telling that the Vice President to be acting as a President in cases of any vacancy or absence of the President of India. Article 67 talks about the term, which is the 5 years. 69 is talking about oath to the office of the Vice President. Article 70 is talking about the President functions in cases of contingencies. And Article 71 is talking about the matters related to election disputes with reference to election of the Vice President. Now, with reference to elections here, now these are not direct elections. You know that in India we have the first past the post system. It means that the majority of votes gotten by any candidate will be winning the elections. But this is not the same case with reference to president and vice president. The vice president in the country are actually selected by an electoral college. Now, this college is consisting of the elected and the nominated members of the both houses of the parliament, that is the Rajya Sabha and the Lok Sabha. They do not include the MLAs of the state legislative assemblies, a very, very important point to be noted. Now the system here is not the first past the post system. Here it is the proportional representation where we try to rank our choiced candidates. So this is a ranking system via single transferable vote where secret voting method is also allowed, and here only disputes related to the same here, or say the elections of the vice president, can be examined by the Supreme Court, and its decision will be legal and binding. And here mainly when we talk about the various other provisions with reference to the qualifications for the office of the vice president, she must be a citizen of India, 35 years or older, also must be eligible for election to the Rajya Sabha. In the comments you let me know what are the various eligibility for any person to be member of the Rajya Sabha. Also, at the end of the day, you should not be holding any office of profit under central, state, local governments or any other public authorities. And your condition of the office is that you cannot remain a member of any house if you become the vice president of the country. And after taking the oath, you have to do the same. Next, the term must be 5 years and they are also eligible for re-election any number of times. The main causes of vacancy, right, of the seat of the vice president can be, for example, they have expired their term or they have resigned in the recent case as we have seen, and the resignation must be submitted to the President of India. Also, they can be removed, or the vacancy can also be related to the death or disqualification, or if the election is declared as void by the Supreme Court of India. And in cases of any vacancy, the election must be held as soon as possible without any delay. This is not the same case of the President of India. No, we have a period of 6 months for the same, but here we have to conduct the elections as soon as possible. Next, when we have to understand the main powers and the functions of the vice president, it has legislative and executive role. It has mainly, most important function is done via the legislative role. By serving as the ex officio chairperson of the Rajya Sabha, it actually serves, kind of the same roles like the Speaker of the Lok Sabha by presiding over the sessions, maintaining order and procedure. Also, this is the vice president who is not a member of the Rajya Sabha, for your information, but has a casting vote, right? Also, it tries to appoint various committee, chairpersons and members in the Rajya Sabha, and also very, very important office for motions like the removal of the Supreme Court or the High Court judges. And as an executive role, it is acting as a president if at all the President of India encounters death, resignation, removal, impeachment, absence, or some illness. For that, it can serve for a maximum of 6 months until a new president is elected. And when the vice president will be serving as the president of our country, the deputy chairperson of the Rajya Sabha will be the vice president. This is important for your prelims examination and also for your mains. Now, we have to compare the US vice president and our Indian vice president. Now, the Indian Vice President can be remaining as a president for a maximum of 6 months, but in the case of USA, it can be for the remainder of the term. Also, the main role of the Vice President is chairperson as a Rajya Sabha, but it can also be the President of Senate in the case of the US, right? Now, when we talk about the elections, they are separately elected by the MPs, right? But with reference to the US Vice President, they are elected along with the President, no? Now, also we have to keep in mind that Mr. Jagdeep Dhankar is actually only the third Vice President to resign before the term end. This can be extremely important and crucial prelims information that you have to keep in mind. Now, we have to understand earlier V.V. Giri stepped down from Vice Presidency in 1969, and also we have to keep in mind that R. Venkataraman resigned as Vice President in 1987. After this, we are seeing in the case of Mr. Jagdeep Dhankar. And at the end of the day, we have to discuss the removal procedure. They are not removed like the president of our country. They are removed by effective majority. That is a majority of the total membership of Rajya Sabha and a simple majority of Lok Sabha. And the resolution must be originating only in Rajya Sabha. Very important to be kept in mind, and a 14 days notice must be given for the same. So this is all for this topic. This has been a purely factual one, nothing too much to explain here, but very important for your mains and for your prelims examination, because this is the thing which is happening in the news. So now we'll be moving on to the next. Guys, the next article is actually on the deliberation which is going on with reference to framing the rules for deep sea mining. Now this is related to GS3, environmental pollution and degradation, because we need to understand the topic of deep sea mining and how it contributes to environmental challenges. Firstly, with reference to IUCN, deep sea mining is the process of retrieving mineral deposits from the deep sea bed, that is the ocean, below 200 meters, which you have to keep in mind. Now, what are the mineral deposits we are talking about? We are talking about the various mineral deposits which are present throughout the ocean floors, mid-ocean regions, and the sea mounts. We find various manganese, copper, cobalt instances lying deep in the seabeds, which are a rich treasure trove of our critical minerals that power the modern day electric appliances. So this is why, throughout the entire world, in the world oceans, we have this kind of minerals spread across the seabed. Now, there is the International Seabed Authority, which was established in 1994 under the UNCLOS, the UN UNCLOS, which is entrusted with monitoring of the seabed and with reference to the ocean floor, subsoil outside our national jurisdiction. Headquarters are at Kingston, Jamaica, and here they are mainly looking at the exploitation of the deep sea minerals. You can tell that they are actually the regulators of the deep sea minerals. And here, when we talk about our own national laws and regulations, we have our Offshore Areas Mineral Act of 2002, because if you are signatory to any international organization and their conventions, you have to frame a national law. India, being actually a member of the International Seabed Authority, it has a national provision to prevent exploitation in the seabed, because we have so many environmental concerns starting from sediment plumes. These are nothing but when the various ships or the vessels who go to the deep sea to extract the minerals, they actually send a pipe deep down the ocean. And when they try to extract the minerals from the ocean bed, these minerals, while they go up the pipe, they release various sediments, and also the various vessels and the ships, their own wastes are released into the oceans nearby. This is causing a lot of plumes and sediment to be dispersed along the entire height of the ocean, which causes a loss to the various marine biodiversity. Also, these operations of the ships and vessels, they create a lot of noise. They disturb some aquatic creatures such as dolphins, whales, who rely on sounds to have their navigation routes. Next, these ships and vessels also create a lot of light pollution, mainly during the night, which also confuses the marine creatures. And at the end of the day, we also have oil spills and leaks from these particular activities. Now, we have to understand one thing, that USA is actually not a member of the ISA, right? And also has not yet ratified the UNCLOS, right? So this law of the sea, USA is not actually a party to. But you can see, with reference to the various important zones of deep sea mining, such as the Clarion-Clipperton zone, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, the Northwest Pacific, and also the Indian Ocean, most of the companies, as you can see, they are from, the Western countries, correct? Also, we have to understand one thing, that if the US is not a party to such important conventions, the very purpose of these conventions are not held, because US is a very important institution in itself, and it actually gives a lot of direction and expertise in any international organization. So if US is not a part, we have to understand it is not a part because it wants to exploit the deep sea minerals. It do not want to be policed or schooled by the International Seabed Authority on the various mining proposals. And that is why, this July 2025 negotiations which are taking place at the ISA in Jamaica, right, the US is not present there. We have the 169 full-time assembly members who are deliberating on creating 107 rules for the deep sea mining, but US is not present here. So these 107 draft regulations as of now, which are being negotiated, these are trying to frame various rules and regulations to prevent exploitation, right, in the deep sea, and also to regulate exploration licenses of the ocean floor minerals. As you can see, these are all the companies from the rest of the world, right, from Korea, from China, from Germany, from France, who have some assignments already undergoing in the deep seas. So these are all the companies which are actually taking the advantage of the deep sea minerals. But here the deadlock is due to the US. Mainly the key point of disagreement is actually the authorities here, the governments here, all the countries here are not talking about how to protect the marine ecosystem. They're only talking about how to exploit the resources there. They're not talking about the dolphins, the deep sea creatures, the whales, and the preservation. Also, they are not clear as to whether to start mining before sufficient scientific data is gathered, because according to the scientists, right, they have signed a global pause petition where 600 plus marine scientists have actually warned that let us first conduct a scientific research, then you start mining operations. Without a particular scientific research, how can you go on mining? Because various zones in the marine ecosystems have their own sensitivity. If we pollute beyond reason, they will be collapsing. Also, the same has been requested by a national government from the Chile government. Here, they have sought a moratorium, they have sought a temporary ban on all deep sea mining proposals because it is polluting the environment. But here, what the US did, in April 2025, Mr. Trump's government actually released permits for deep sea mining. And here the industry is arguing that we need to transition to green energy, for which we need critical minerals, we need rare earth metals, we need silicon, we need so many polymetallic nodules. So let us have it. It will be good for your green energy. But at the end of the day, we have to listen to the environment, right? But it is not happening as of now. USA is telling that it is not a party to the UNCLOS or the ISA, and that is why it has gone on with the permits, where even a Canadian company has applied for the permits and are actually thinking of doing the business there. So this is what we have to understand from this article. Now we have to move to the next one. Guys, on July 30th, the NASA-ISRO joint mission known as NISAR will be launched. It's very interesting from the perspective of general science and from the awareness in the fields of space that we have to know and look into what is this all about. Now see, this NISAR is standing for NASA ISRO Synthetic Aperture Radar. It is having a radar antenna, as you can see. This is to the tune of 12 meters. This is 12 meters and it has a weight of around 2392 kilo when we talk about the entire apparatus. This is a very innovative and interesting piece of equipment if we think of using this for our own purposes. It will be launching on 30th July. And here ISRO will be using our own rocket GSLV F-16 via the Satish Dhawan Space Center at Sriharikota. Now here it is having a mission life of 3 years. and an orbit of around 747 kilometers, which is a sun synchronous low Earth orbit. That means that the satellite will be reaching over one place at the same time each day, which is a very interesting if you want to capture high quality images of your forests, mountains, rivers, etc. Mainly, the key feature of this mission is the first use of dual frequency radar satellite. NASA has supplied the L band of this mission and ISRO has supplied the S band. Now the L band will be helping us to go deeper between the rain, clouds and understanding the various images. Also, the ISRO has supplied the surface level texture gauging apparatus which we need to understand the forests and the usual textures that we see from the satellites. So here, these satellites will be observing in generally two frequencies, and this will be measuring moisture content in the atmosphere, surface roughness and various motion. So this will be scanning the entire globe in 12 days and giving us extremely detailed images. So mainly this actually was envisaged to be launched in the early say months of 2025, but we had so many delays just of supplying, unfitting and monitoring these 12-meter unfurlable antenna. So this antenna can be actually be furled down just like an umbrella, and when it will be launched into the space and be installed in the orbit, it will then be unfurled like the entire antenna here. Now the main applications and benefits of this entire mission is actually to understand climate change, climate science by looking at glacier melt, sea level rise and so many other climatic phenomena. Then this will be helping in disaster management because it can help us detect earthquakes, because these L and the S bands which are supplied by ISRO and NASA, this will be helping us detect earthquakes, volcanic activities faster right now. Also helping us forecast various soil moisture and river level mapping, because these satellites will be helping us monitoring the courses of rivers too. Also, agriculture can be benefited and water monitoring can also be enhanced by monitoring crop health, measuring droughts, also understanding how our groundwater water cycles are recharged, and at the end of the day understanding the wetlands and how they are increasing or decreasing over a time. At the end of the day, urbanization will also be helped because urban expansion can be analyzed properly, deforestation can be monitored and forest policies can be framed with proper images, because this will be covering the entire world in just 12 days. So just imagine the data that we will be getting with reference to the images that it will be capturing. So now we'll be moving on to the final article. The index of the 8 core industries have grown at 1.7% in June. That means our industrial activity is increasing. How? Because we try to measure the industrial activities via various sectors. That is what you need to keep in mind right now. Now firstly, when we talk about measuring the industrial activities, it is not humanly possible for us to measure each and every industry, each and every factory, for which the government of India via the DPII, so this has figured out 8 core industries. This means we have petroleum refinery products, we have electricity industry, steel, coal, crude oil, natural gas, cement and fertilizers. So this particular index is looking at the performance of these individual industries. And if you see in the brackets, the weightages are also given, because in 2015 there is a question with reference to who is given the highest weightage. So we have to understand that there are these 8 industries which are very important for our entire industrial activities. And if you see, the recent data is telling that there is a 1.7% growth, because here 3 out of 8 sectors recorded a positive growth. Steel recorded the highest increase in output, while coal actually witnessed contraction. Now, apart from this, we also have another index which we know as Index of Industrial Production, which we actually have released by the National Statistics Organization, the NSO. The base year for the same is 2011-12, and mainly they look at mining industry, manufacturing industry and electricity industry. Now these 8 core industries actually form around 40.27% of the IIP. So you can understand that IIP is a broader index. The 8 core industries index is actually a subset of the same. So That was all for today. I thank you all for being a very patient audience. This was a long discussion. I hope you attend the quiz which is following up. Till we meet again, all the best and best of luck. Thank you.